In New York is Adam Gopnik. He's a staff writer at The New Yorker. So thanks for joining us. This week, Adam, we've seen an increasing number of prominent Republicans voicing concerns about Trump. But you said that Trump has always been transparent about who he is. How would you describe his behavior and rhetoric throughout the campaign?
Yeah, hi, Hannah. Yeah, I think that the reality is that Trump has always been of one piece. He came to notoriety in a political context as a birther, which is simply presenting the raw sewage of racism and that absurd conspiracy theory about Obama's background. The idea that Trump kind of changes from day to day, that he's a normal political candidate who can be tactically adjusted according to the needs of the moment, I think is absurd. Trump is an extreme right-wing authoritarian. He's a populist nationalist. I would not hesitate to call him a fascist, broadly speaking.
Meaning
He's
what?
The face of American fascism.
Explain that.
Sure. Well, fascism is not some simple matrix of characteristics that you point to and say, this guy belongs. It changes and takes on its own form with every nation that it infects. In Germany, it was rabidly anti-Semitic. In Italy, it was pompously neoclassical. And in America, naturally, it takes on the forms of celebrity television and of reality cable and all of those things. But its core idea is that the nation has suffered some unimaginable injury from outside, from others coming outside, and that it takes a strong man, an entrusting power to a strong man, to avenge that injury. And that's Trump's ideology from beginning to end. That's all he offers and what he offers. And if you watch the crowds who come to see him, there's a very effective and affecting video that the New York Times put online just yesterday, you can see that that's what they're responding to. It's not they're not in there to root for an economic conservative who has free market solutions to the problems of health care. They're there to scream about black people. They're there to scream about Mexicans. And they're there to scream, above all, about Hillary Clinton, to display that misogyny. That's what this is all about. And you cannot put either a pretty face on it, nor can you put a tactical face on it, that it's a question of how this week is going or whether or not he's won the day.
You were explaining some of the crowds that you see behind Trump at these rallies, but really what faction of the American public is buying into Trump's views?
Well, that's always hard to know. You hope and pray that it remains a minority. It's something that appeals overwhelmingly to, in plain English, to uneducated white men. That's the core of his support. And it's not impossible to have enormous empathy for the anxiety that they feel in a time of enormous economic and social change, and to understand why that anxiety would get appeased, or that they would feel it was appeased by the presence of an authoritarian strongman. That's a classic syndrome, Hannah, that goes all the way back to the earliest parts of modernity. That's one of the things that typically happens in times of anxiety. People look for a nationalist strongman. It's true in Russia with Putin. It was true in Italy with Mussolini. It's true in America with Trump. That's the core he appeals to. What's frightening, actually, though, is that there's a kind of overlap now that's at work where he also appeals to Republicans who ought to know better and who do know better, because they're so overwhelmed by a kind of a tribal urge to solidarity. Their habit of hating Hillary Clinton is practically religious, and they cannot escape it, even though they know perfectly well, people like Paul Ryan, for instance, that the man who's leading them is inconsiderable, is a man who they despise as much as his opponents do.
Now, you talk about some of the Republicans, and you've talked about the normalization of Trump. You've written about this. Why do you think we've seen his party, the media, and others continue to normalize his behavior?
It's one of the worst things that's happening, that Trump is becoming normalized. This man who's utterly abnormal is not like anything else. He's not Barry Goldwater. He's not Richard Nixon. Certainly not Ronald Reagan. Why is he getting normalized? I think there are two things primarily at work. One is that the media, and I am a member of it rather than an outsider and a critic of it, has a natural investment in narrative. There's got to be a story that's being told. And in order to preserve the illusion of objectivity, it's much easier to say, well, he's having a bad day. He's having a tactically ineffective week than it is to tell over and over again the simple truth. And the simple truth is that he is an authoritarian nationalist who is deeply hostile to democratic norms, and he will always be that way. He will always say crazy and outrageous things because he's a mentally unbalanced, pathologically lying, fascistically minded authoritarian. That's the reality. But you can't say that. So you have to talk in terms of a contested narrative of up and down. That's one reason. The other reason is, as I said a moment ago, it's because the respectable side of the Republican Party has made their soul over to him rather than have the courage simply to say, this is unacceptable. Not all. Not all. There are significant and honorable exceptions. But far too many of them have made, and I will go there, the same deal that respectable conservatives made with Hitler in 1933. He's better than the left, and at least we can control him. It's an illusion, but they've got it.
But do you see at this point a sense that this campaign is crumbling as it continues?
Well, that's today's story, right? We check out the polls and the blogs and 9 o'clock in the morning and you say, oh, it has a clownish and an oafish look. And it's perfectly possible, let's pray it's the case, that when we all look back at this 6 months from now, we'll say, oh, he never could have succeeded. You can see that this was a kind of oafish, comic, grotesque last stand of a certain kind of white ethnic nationalism. But, there are no guarantees in this world. Events, as a wise man once said, are in the saddle. As someone else said, Trump's interests and the interests of the ISIS terrorists are now perfectly aligned. We have no idea what could happen with the right, or that is to say the wrong, series of events in the next 6 months. So today's oafishness could easily become tomorrow's ogreishness, and I don't think there are any guarantees that this thing is over.
So what would a Trump victory in November mean?
I think, and I have written, and I will say flat out, it would mean effectively the end of what the wonderful musical Hamilton calls the American experiment. It would mean that American democracy would be endangered in a way that it has not been, at least since the time of the American Civil War in 1860. There have been right-wingers, there have been extreme right-wingers, there have been demagogues, there have been left-wingers, but there has never before been a candidate of a major political party who was openly hostile to the norms and rules and expectations of constitutional liberal democracy. And to expect him to change or to alter or to be controlled if he ever came to power is a pernicious illusion that history has falsified again and again and again when people like Trump come to power.
Well, it's definitely something everyone's keeping their eye on. Adam Gopnik, thank you for your time today.